Hey all you cats and kittens and all you non-binary fittens, it's your boy DBiddles. Welcome to ChatBots. And you all surely know what we do on ChatBots by now, don't you, my smart, devoted, and dare I say it, strikingly good-looking viewers? Of course you do. I wouldn't dare insult you by suggesting that you are unaware that on ChatBots we build another one of DBiddles' plastic robot toys and shake DBiddles' goofy little noggin to see what loose screws, pocket lint, and miscellaneous crap comes tumbling out. Obviously, you brilliant, beautiful viewers know all that stuff, so we can skip straight to the part where I start talking too much. Because I know you love that part, baby. It's my favorite part too. Now let's talk a little bit about our bot. Hey, say that 3 times fast. Little bit about the bot, little bit about the bot, little bit about the bot. Today, we have the VF-1 Valkyrie from Super Dimensional Fortress Macross. We've talked about Gundam an awful lot in this video series thus far. With the advent of Gundam came the subgenre of real robot anime, where the mechs in the mecha show are akin to military hardware, not unlike tanks or fighter planes. Some of them taking that a little bit more literally than others, as you can see our Valkyrie here switches between robot form, fighter plane form, and an in-betweeny form called the Jurwalk mode. And if Gundam was the Coca-Cola of this movement, Macross would be like the Pepsi. Macross was a massive hit when it first aired, inspiring a number of sequels that continue to this day, most of which have yet to make it to the States due to legal reasons involving Macross being included in the first part of Robotech, one of the early anime mega hits alongside Voltron, Akira, and Nausicaa to really kick off the American anime craze. Macross takes place in a world where the arrival of a giant empty alien spacecraft causes all of humanity to eventually unite after a massive global war, achieving an uneasy world peace and repairing the craft to once again take to the stars. The repaired spaceship, dubbed the Macross, is kept on South Eteria Island, where a great big public celebration in honor of the ship's upcoming first test flight is being held. But the sudden proximity of the giant humanoid Zentradi aliens, who identify the Macross as belonging to an enemy fleet from a past war, accidentally causes the Macross to react automatically, firing upon the curious Zentradi and kickstarting a new intergalactic war. Isn't that just typical? You clean up one mess and then before you can kick up your feet, another one happens. Under fire from the Zentradi scouts in desperation, the crew of the Macross activate the Fold System warp drive, transporting the ship, the island base, the airtight civilian shelters, a couple aircraft carriers, and all the soldiers and civilians aboard across the solar system to the surface of Pluto. The Fold System apparently warped off independently from the ship after the jump to Pluto, so the Macross now has to fly back to Earth, with the curious but persistent Zentradi in hot pursuit, but not before incorporating all the other buildings and vessels into the body of the Macross, making it a super-dimensional fortress, see what they did there? Which can transform into a massive humanoid form during battles. The war-obsessed, world-conquering Zentradi seem intent on retrieving this ship intact, meaning despite their numerous setbacks, they're treating their human prey with kid gloves. Further, the Zentradi are very curious about human culture and how it relates to their fabled proto-culture, a progenitor race that is said to be the creators of the Zentradi. The Zentradi are so entrenched in their warrior mindset that they have forsaken all art, all culture, all interpersonal relationships in favor of their obsessive, single-minded fixation on combat and imperialistic expansion. They segregate their fleet based on sex. Their every waking hour is dedicated to practice and preparation for war, and they've forgotten much of their history. So when their spies who sneak aboard the Macross are exposed to civilian life, to good food and fashion and art and romance and music, it awakens something in them. While many of them are shocked and confused by the human's way of life, many more of them feel a deep longing for an end to the constant hostility and conflict that has burned their society for eons. They didn't choose their Klingon-esque lifestyle, they were just born into it and conditioned by it, having been shaped by this rigid, brutal, hostile hegemony into perpetual compliance. Those among the Zentradi who are reluctant to embrace change, can they really be blamed for that mindset when this hypermilitarism has been hammered into their heads for so long? When the humans they try to integrate with might be suspicious of them? When civilian life features new trials that they aren't equipped for? And if they did have art and culture, Well, in this society that specifically values combat and conquest above all, what kind of culture would you imagine them having? But I get ahead of myself, that's spoilers for the sequel. And all of that is just the background to the main story, which is that of the developing love triangle between civilian pilot turned reluctant soldier Hikaru Ichijo, the bubbly and whimsical waitress turned pop sensation Lin Minmei, and the stern and world-weary career officer Misa Hayase. Brought together by their dire circumstances but kept apart by the strife and struggle of war, Hikaru has to choose between the elusive songstress and the guarded first lieutenant. But under the circumstances, besieged by overwhelming forces, can love prevail both literally in the case of Hikaru and metaphorically in the case of the Zentradi? Or are humans, much like their Zentradi foes, no stranger to war and strife themselves, doomed to repeat the cycle of warfare? Hey, that sounds like a good spot to move on to the main topic of the video. Alright, hands up, everybody who watched the last video with Hygog. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3... some of you seem to think these chapters I'm assigning you for homework are optional. Let's see how that works out for you on test day. Well, another thinly veiled plug from my other videos out of the way, can anyone tell me what the last one was about? Yes, Mr. DBiddles. The last video covered deeper messaging and theming and media literacy and how a lot of stuff goes unexamined by the people who enjoy it. Yes, very good, Mr. Biddles. And can you remember what I said was ironic and particularly sinister about the Gundam series? Not really. To be honest, Professor, your videos are very long and unfocused. I remember something about goblins, though. Well, that's why you should be taking diligent notes, young man. I had said that it was ironic how the anti-war narrative was co-opted by the fiscal obligation of the series to sell toys of the featured war machines as a means of making it a profitable brand, and the unspoken implication of the merchandising of said war machines glamorizes said war machines and muddies the anti-war messaging, so that the audience often comes away viewing war actually somewhat favorably. Professor, if the implication is unspoken, then how am I supposed to take notes on that? Mr. Biddles, I trust that at this point in your academics that you would have a greater capacity for critical thought and reading comprehension. But Professor, it's not reading, it's a video. See me after class, Mr. Biddles. And scene. So yes, I made a lot of noise about how there's a lot of subtext in all your favorite stuff. Lots of ideas and themes we just kind of overlook, and how it's important to examine those things rather than just ignore them. And I also talked a lot about the Mario movie, and how some people think it was feminizing men and making them less capable of fulfilling their traditional gender roles. But before getting into this one, let me kinda just get this little disclaimer out of the way. I am a dude. I identify as dude. I was assigned dude at birth. My father, whom I lived with until I was of age, was also a dude. His father who raised him, also a dude. I have 3 older dude siblings and 1 younger dude sibling. I was socialized into dudeliness. I spent a lot of time associating with other similar dudes. I consider myself a fairly masculine dude. I shave my head as part of the handling of my dude pattern baldness, so I don't have the little horseshoe of hair on my head. And I don't shave my face as part of being even more dudely for the sake of my spouse. And furthermore, I am, for the most part, a straight dude. I'd probably be in that 1 or 2 range on a Kinsey scale, and it is from that perspective that I'll be analyzing all of this, so take that for whatever it's worth. Alright, we've had our veggies, let's get to the meat. Think about a lot of the media that you consume, both as a kid and now. If you're anything like me, there's probably a fair bit of overlap there. And now, think a little bit about what it is that appeals to you about that media. As a little kid, if someone had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I'd have told them a Ninja Turtle, that having been my first hyperfixation. And when I was not watching Ninja Turtles or playing with Ninja Turtle action figures, I spent a bunch of time play acting as a Ninja Turtle. If my parents took me someplace where I was able to run around, I'd be hiding around displays or on the lookout for bad guys who could be lurking around the corner at the local Kroger's or Target, who might then be thwarted by a 4-year-old ninja. If I didn't have plastic ninja weapons, or an officially licensed Ninja Turtle mask, I might make do with sticks from the yard or colored handkerchiefs. On a couple occasions at home, I even observed that the Ninja Turtles don't typically wear much in the way of clothing, and I might have run around with only a ninja mask and ninja belt and embarrassed my older brothers in front of the girls that they brought home to meet the family. But whatever the case, my dedication to the battle against evil remained a constant motivation, until, in my attempts to play fight my baby brother, I knocked out his 2 front baby teeth when he was barely a year old, and that kinda cooled me off a little bit. Though that would not be the last time my roughhousing and or horseplay would come at the expense of my younger brother. If he's watching, legitimately sorry about being kind of an asshole. So to all my fellow dudes out there, does any of my stories sound familiar to your own life? Some of the details will probably differ, hopefully you never gave another child stitches, but did any of you latch on to some kind of superhero crime fighter type character? Maybe yours wasn't the Ninja Turtles, maybe it was He-Man or Spider-Man or G.I. Joe, the X-Men, Power Rangers, Ben 10, Naruto, whoever. Odds are good though that first thing wasn't your only thing, right? The nerd life has many tendrils by which it can grab you. And once you start with He-Man, then you move on to G.I. Joe and all the rest. Hey, maybe some of you non-dudes can even relate with your own superheroines, like She-Ra, the Powerpuff Girls, Sailor Moon, some other series that had you fighting evil by moonlight and winning love by daylight. But it's an especially prominent factor in the development of my fellow dudes, am I right? There's not a whole lot of domestic role models who advocate for nonviolent conflict resolution for little boys in the same vein of Barbie or My Little Pony or Strawberry Shortcake. And some of the characters who do exist, who are intended to bridge the gap between boy and girl demographics, like Barney the Dinosaur or the Care Bears or Captain Planet, they all tend to invite derision from your peers if you still unironically like them past a certain age. Like, remember back when My Little Pony Friendship is Magic came out? And there were a bunch of older guys who kinda got into it for its wholesome, fun, whimsical stories about overcoming interpersonal differences to enrich personal and communal life. And then, everybody was kinda picking on them for it. Like, admittedly, part of that was because a percentage of those dudes were very openly horny for the cartoon horse characters, but leaving that aside, I don't see how the Magic Horse Show is any more undignified or preposterous than, say, Pokemon or Sonic the Hedgehog, 2 other very silly cartoons that a large percentage of the fan base is very openly horny for, but which doesn't usually provoke the same level of scorn and puzzlement for the male fan base, unless you happen to be Christian. Or how about video games? How many times have you heard someone say they like something harmless like Mario Kart, Candy Crush, The Sims, Minecraft, Animal Crossing, Harvest Moon, and then some gamer bro calls them a casual and then brags about liking God of War, Call of Duty, Tekken, Dark Souls, Devil May Cry? Because, I don't know, I guess real gamers don't like Tetris or Pac-Man or whatever? Hey, isn't it wild how many cartoons and video games feature combat and crime fighting as a primary conceit for their stories? Like, beyond just Tom and Jerry slapstick cartoon violence, there just seems to be so much kids media centered around the never-ending battle between the forces of good and the armies of evil. I mean, I could keep listing them. I do have a penchant for making lists way beyond the point where they are necessary to illustrate my rhetoric, but I'll spare you any more of them. But you could probably come up with the examples on your own, right? Just so much media that centers around good guys fighting bad guys, particularly in terms of media aimed at boys and AMABs, right? And it doesn't really stop when you get older either. What with so many crime dramas and action films and westerns and war stories and zombie movies and supernatural detectives and so on. And so many of them kind of feature similar themes and plots. The bad guys are all about chaos and terror and conquest and ruling through force, and meanwhile the good guys are all about peace and free will, and they don't want to fight, but the violence done by their enemies justifies the violence they in turn must do to protect all these innocent lives so that the freedom and democracy can persevere. And if they have an ending at all, because let's face it, the Avengers and Thundercats and the Z-Fighters seem to always find another existential threat to keep the content machine running. If they have an ending at all, it usually comes after beating the other side into submission, after many epic battles where superior force is the ultimate decider of fate. And then Optimus Prime or Superman or President Whitmore from Independence Day or whoever gives some speech to the audience about how freedom is the right of all sentient beings, and they can be a great people, they wish to be, they only need the light to show the way. Blah blah blah, peace and prosperity, people have so much potential for good, hope for the future, belief in mankind's ability to overcome, with liberty and justice for all. That is, if they don't go the poignant or grim and gritty route and have the hero nobly sacrifice themselves, going down valiantly, fighting the endless hordes in the battle against evil, possibly because no one else has the strength and the guts to stand up and aid in the never-ending war for good. And you'd think, with all this media stretching back decades upon decades about how truth and justice will prevail and about how all we're saying is give peace a chance, you'd think that all those impressionable children who have grown up to be whole-ass adults with their Captain America t-shirts and never removed from box Kenner Star Wars figures and replica keyblades, you'd think we'd be getting real close to that world peace thing now, right? That we'd have a much greater percentage of peaceful, level-headed champions of righteousness and a whole lot fewer angry, violent, disillusioned, embittered, burgeoning supervillains and serial killers, right? Well, let's just check the TV news and see. You guys know where that bit's headed, don't you? Yeah, kinda turns out all those inspirational heroes who taught all us little kids the importance of getting along in friendship and fighting for the little guy, yeah, they didn't do such a good job, huh? Now, there's a lot of things I could expound on from this point, and maybe in future videos I will, but I kinda want to focus on how this specifically pertains to masculinity and the male psyche. Because, see, a lot of people struggle with identity and purpose and a sense of direction growing up, but it kinda seems like it's a little more fraught these days, particularly for young dudes. We get lots of people complaining about how masculinity is under attack and how feminism and or gender theory and or sexual degeneracy and or wokeness is ruining everything. And there's all these personalities and figures popping up to try and set men on the right path. Lots of influencers and gurus and men's rights activists who just have so much to say about being a high-value male or whatever. And there's a lot that can be said about all those people and what masculinity, open quotes, should look like, if it should look like anything at all, and who is the best to be teaching that. But let's just come back to our fiction for now, right? Because I kind of think there's a little more here than typically gets analyzed. Now, we all know that enjoying violent media or media that features amoral acts or characters doesn't automatically turn someone into a school shooter, right? Like, hundreds of millions of people play violent video games, from Postal to Mortal Kombat to GTA to Yakuza. More and more people are partaking in digital carnage as the years roll on, and the vast majority of them are not trying to imitate Scorpion ripping out Raiden's spine, or Doomguy shotgunning cacodemons in the dome. And the same is true of every other moral panic, from comic books to D&D to Tom and Jerry to rock music to slasher films to drag queens. These are the reflexive scapegoats of a society that refuses to address the real problems, so instead chooses to demonize something that the kids like but the uninformed reactionary older generations don't understand. If kids playing Fortnite is to blame whenever a mentally ill 16-year-old shoots his classmates, then surely Dirty Harry and John McClane would be to blame when a mentally ill middle-aged police officer shoots an unarmed black kid, right? But it never seems to apply to things your grandparents like, does it? No, it's only when some 20-something is spending his free time between shifts at Starbucks playing Warframe, rather than watching the arguably more intense and graphic Mel Gibson in Passion of the Christ, that it's suddenly an issue. I'm wholly in favor of artistic freedom. Some of my favorite cathartic stuff involves a touch of the old ultra-violence. Whether it's the gory, excessive CSLA, that's cool shit to look at, of some tasteless horror and action flicks, or the mindless schadenfreude of a good video game, I can definitely see the appeal. Even if it's just some cartoony superhero fights, it's just kind of fun to watch like Green Lantern or Danny Phantom or the Autobots shoot laser beams at bad guys every week. It's fun to escape and pretend that jerks and villains will get theirs in the end. And it's not like it's all catharsis, right? Like there's obviously good messaging and worthwhile stuff that can be taken from these stories. About courage and perseverance and camaraderie and virtue and integrity and the willingness to stand up for what's right. That's why these heroes tend to stick in our mind, right? That's the whole point of fiction, as parables for life lessons. If you saw my episode where I talked about Superman while building Gundam Ariel, you should totally watch it again, by the way, then you might think I'm actually very cynical about heroes, but I'm not. Or at least, not totally. And every cynic is just a disappointed idealist, after all. I genuinely love and admire all my favorite fictional heroes and try to incorporate the lessons their stories teach me into everyday life. Here again I cite Mr. Gaiman's quote about fiction and dragons. Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. But right there, I've kinda just demonstrated something. Fiction doesn't necessarily manifest behavior, but it does influence thinking. And who's to say it always influences thinking for the better? That's the whole point, isn't it? I like My Hero Academia. Watching the characters in that grow and mature and strive to be more selfless, thoughtful human beings makes me want to emulate the same in my own life. Media literacy, critical thought, and self-reflection are difficult skills to master. I feel most people would agree on that. But they're important to learn if you want to spend so much mental energy on this art. And I feel that most people would additionally believe themselves as having mastered those skills, but wouldn't anybody? An immature mind can't really recognize itself as immature after all. Wouldn't people who have spent their entire lives in a society kind of grow accustomed to and unquestioning of the mores and folkways of that society? I'll give you an example. One of the few unambiguously cool things that the United States has going for it, one of its founding principles, is that monarchies are cringe. Like kings and queens and princes and princesses and all the rest, we think those guys suck, that they have no relevance in modern society, and that their presence in a nation is antithetical to democracy and self-governance. Monarchies are unelected, unqualified, and cannot be recalled if they're not serving the public interest. Where does their authority come from? God, apparently, some magical, mysterious, undetectable, inscrutable force who is best friends with the church. And the church works hand in hand with the crown, funnily enough. Kinda seems like there's a racket going on there. And wouldn't you know, the people most fit to rule after one monarch dies is their kids. It's the ultimate form of nepotism, which also seems to suggest that leadership qualities, such as strength, intellect, righteousness, justice, all of those are apparently genetic, and nobody else is fit to rule because they don't have those same genes, no matter what kind of mad, incestuous, syphilitic royal dullards are on offer. Hey, that kinda sounds like eugenics, you know, the fake science that the Nazis were interested in to prove their Übermenschen status. Even if you do have someone who is a good king, what happens if their kid sucks at being king? What happens if they're actually really evil? Oh well, sorry about your luck, just hope that this one passes away in his sleep soon and keep your fingers crossed that their kid is better. And even in a constitutional monarchy where you have a queen and an elected prime minister and a parliament and supposedly the queen is purely ceremonial and has no impact on policy, and that's a very big supposedly, it doesn't make sense that the queen and her family of inbred entitled sheltered twats get to reap the benefit of a lavish taxpayer-funded lifestyle when those taxes could be going to public services and utilities and infrastructure. Okay, so monarchies just kinda suck any way you look at it, and if you advocate for them or live in a country where monarchies are still in place, then you've got some work to do. Just fucking fix it, dog. It's not hard. And yet, how many works of fiction do you know of where the good guys are benevolent royalty, or work on behalf of benevolent royalty, and their benevolence despite being royalty is never once questioned? What, you don't believe me? Here I go listing again. Star Wars, Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, Black Panther, Aquaman, Masters of the Universe, Lord of the Rings, Voltron, Final Fantasy, Avatar, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round, about 70% of Disney movies, almost any and all historical fiction, etc. And if one monarch is bad, don't worry, our heroes will overthrow them and install a new monarch who will totally fix everything forever.
Odds are good that that last monarch was only bad because they weren't actually the rightful firstborn heir to the throne, handpicked by God, and they were just some usurper. Don't worry, we've got the right person in charge now. Them and all their descendants will rule with honor and decency henceforth. It's monarch apologia is what it is. It's making something you wouldn't normally countenance in real life if you thought about it for more than 5 seconds seem harmless and quaint. Oh, this country has adorable accents and a king and queen still. It's just like Narnia. You're not Narnia, UK, and you're not fucking Albion. It's 2023, get your shit together, you Brexit bitches. Lizzie just fucking dropped dead. If you hurry, you can get her dumbfuck cousin husband out on his ass before he croaks too. How is the US ahead of you on this? We don't even have affordable healthcare. You have no excuse. Say what you will about the Game of Thrones finale, it at least got that part kind of right. That the Iron Throne is stupid, and now they've moved on to a liberal democracy, where a group of unelected former royals and wealthy people with connections now make decisions for everyone. Hooray! Progress! Anyways, you can see how this thing that we just take for granted can be kind of nonsensical and stupid and harmful because we don't really examine it, right? So like, what kinds of unexamined influence is all this media about conflict being resolved through people fighting each other, that caters predominantly to boys and men, doing to those people who consume it? Well, in short, it kind of causes a bit of a rift between the role those dudes think they should be taking in society and the role that is actually helpful to society. Because let's face it, there really aren't all that many Foot Ninja or Decepticons or Cobra Commanders or Zentradi aliens in real life. Almost all quote-unquote bad guys in this world can be attributable to wealth inequality and or mental illness, both of which kind of exacerbate each other. Unless you count actually wealthy and powerful bad guys who can usually commit their bad guy acts through mostly legal means, and usually do so out of callous disregard for human life in pursuit of further power and wealth. You know, like a group of unelected wealthy people with connections making decisions for society via lobbying. Hooray! Progress! There isn't really much need for violent confrontation in real life, and we kind of always agree that when such things happen, they're tragedies, and usually the result of us or our systems fucking up big time in a totally preventable fashion. Even the wars that the media tend to sell us as good and noble causes worth fighting, that they manufacture consent for, we can all pretty universally agree that they suck ass, right? Like, if we're still having to fight each other at this point, we must be doing something wrong, you know? And surely getting tough on crime, surely flexing our militaristic might with shock and awe, surely fighting fire with fire in this regard is actually completely counterproductive. Know what I'm saying? We can't be saying, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and then be literally naming firearms peacemakers. How many school shooters are we going to blame on mental health and then not do anything about making mental health more accessible than assault weapons? And yet, how many of my fellow dudes are still kind of playing pretend in our minds? How many of us are still pretending to be Ninja Turtles at the local Kohl's or Target? Not literally, but like figuratively. Don't lie to me now. How many of you have ever kinda secretly wished someone would try and jump out and mug you at knife point so you could go all Cobra Kai on their ass? How many of you have ever looked at another dude or even a wild animal and said to yourself, "Yeah, I could take that in a fight"? How many of you have, hoped that some asshole guy or a group of asshole guys would kind of sexually menace some pretty girl in your vicinity so you could go kick their asses and then impress her? Sounds kind of psychotic when you say it out loud, right? Or hey, how many of you have ever had the "what if the zombie apocalypse happened" fantasy? You watch The Walking Dead or Dawn of the Dead or World War Z and you never think about how miserable that would actually be in real life. Having to eat cold beans out of a can for every meal and be constantly looking over your shoulder when you want to take a shit, and how you could never just, smoke a bowl, play Genshin Impact, and eat Taco Bell in your jammy pants until bedtime. You only think about how cool it would be to build a fort, hammer nails into a baseball bat, and shoot zombies with a sawed-off shotgun. Hey, if you could be any superhero, who would you want to be? Me personally, none of them.
Don't get me wrong, having superpowers sounds rad. I'd choose telekinesis as a power, makes doing so many everyday things so much easier. But having to devote all your free time to running ragged, punching out a revolving door of cackling supervillains, all of whom usually get a few pretty good hits before going down, constantly risking your life to make sure that this week's cosmic threat doesn't erase all of existence, never knowing when you're going to be minding your own business when suddenly you're getting jumped by dark sorcerers or time-traveling bandits or evil clones with a grudge. Yeah, count me out. You probably don't actually get to spend all that much time just web-swinging through New York or getting hot and heavy with Amazonian princesses in leather corsets. You're too busy working your day job, and then clocking out to go patrol the city so you can keep the randos from robbing banks, and then spending what little free time you have rebuilding all your trick arrows, tuning up your Quinjet, and trying to figure out who's leaving all these sinister messages for you scribbled on playing cards. Better hope those guys aren't robbing banks because your good buddy Iron Man just fired a bunch of redundant workers as part of his hostile corporate takeover of Hammer Industries. Better hope you're actually doing good like you've convinced yourself you are, rather than just existing as a further extension of an already overly punitive carceral system. But those fights are always the central appeal to the power fantasies, right? All the morally justified, consequence-free battles against bad guys. It's probably due to the way it's frequently framed as some exciting thing with little to no risk and an almost guaranteed win. If you lose in the video game, you can just respawn. And you know in movies and TV that the good guys win, the bad guys lose, and only a couple of the less important characters have anything to seriously worry about. A lot of times, even if they die, they then can come back later with some kind of mystical or mad science backdoor cheat. But have you ever been in a real fight? Not a boxing match or a wrestling match or a fencing match, but a really real situation where someone is trying to do you harm, and they don't give a shit about tap-out rules or unnecessary roughness. Or hey, have you ever seen The Elephant? Have you ever been in a live-fire combat zone with bullets flying and explosives going off, and shrapnel everywhere, and comrades who you shared a beer and a joke with, or on either side of you catching strays that they never saw and couldn't have predicted? We all remember the first third of Full Metal Jacket, but nobody likes to remember or think about the rest of that movie. It's not some paintball match where the worst you can expect is a skinned knee, and you get to have a Gatorade and a sandwich after the round before you reset with different teams. It's not actually cool or fun. And so much of the problem is in how the action in media is portrayed. John Wick and Ash Williams and Shaft and Bruce Lee and Batman just look so cool doing that shit. But when you think about what they're doing and what they're capable of, it's kind of fucking terrifying. They're actually not too far off from the villains in a lot of those stories in terms of capacity for harm done. But when the good guys do it, it's always because they're cool, strong, masculine dudes who are totally justified in their glorious warrior ways. But when the bad guys do it, it's always because they're inherently violent and brutal and twisted and malicious. Being a warrior is only an admirable quality when it's the dude on your team and not the dude on the other team. I'm gonna go ahead and describe a couple characters to you, and you tell me if these sound like people you want to be around, whom you could feel comfortable getting into a heated interpersonal argument with, not about like the fate of the world or good versus evil or whatever, but like some domestic grievance that they might get a little too personally upset by and could very possibly lash out if they were pressed hard enough. Tell me if you feel comfortable letting someone who can do these sorts of things to you, or anyone who disagrees with them, be the arbiters of good and evil. Like, imagine you're married to one of these dudes, and you can't make them understand why it's not okay for them to leave you with the kids every night after work so they can go out drinking with the guys until 3 in the morning, knowing in the back of your mind that if they ever really got upset, this was what they were capable of. Number 1. A lone warrior, sole living student of the world's deadliest martial art, who has left hundreds of giant, muscly men dead in his wake, who has shaken off entire buildings falling on him, who with a mere touch can render you paralyzed, or even cause your head to instantly swell up and explode. Yeah, that's not Lord Frieza, that's Kenshiro, the main character and post-apocalyptic messiah of Fists of the North Star, one of the foundational titles in shonen battle manga.
Good thing his master chose him to wield the ultimate fighting style instead of one of the numerous other psychopaths who are brutally proficient at effortlessly murdering men with just their hands, almost all of whom were at Japan's next top Ultimate Fighter tryouts. Whew, dodged a bullet on that one. Number 2. Driven insane from torture, an unkillable, deadly paid assassin, master of firearms and close-range combat, literally in love with death, has killed the Avengers on his own, and once shot a man simply for disagreeing with him about Star Wars. Yeah, it's Deadpool. Haha, he kills people for money. So funny. Mental illness is when you reference Street Fighter and talk to the reader while dismembering people. Chimichangas! Lol, so random. Also, there's this one story, Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, which is an alt-universe story where it shows that if he really wanted to, he could do exactly what it says on the cover. Number 3. Possessed by a demon that gives him great strength, carrying so many knives wherever he goes. A born and raised child soldier from a whole society of people where everyone is conditioned from childhood to be a potential warrior, capable of being everywhere at once and disguising himself as anyone. Has fought a literal goddess and won. He is literally a one-man army. It's Naruto Uzumaki! He's the ninja president now by virtue of being the strongest guy around, and with his mastery of shadow clones, he could just be his own surveillance state if he wanted. Number 4. An army of religious zealot warrior wizards who police the universe, born with powers beyond normal beings, capable of smashing fleets of starships together with a gesture, of shooting lightning from their hands, of asphyxiating people from across the room, can easily mind control passers-by into compliance, bearing swords which effortlessly cut through anything and deflect gunfire. Their warrior code forbids them having any emotions that might cloud their judgment and prevent them from enforcing order as they see fit, even love. It's the Jedi! The Jedi are a bunch of unelected, self-governing space police who have the ability to convince people to do whatever they want and the power to hurt anyone who disagrees, and they frequently get involved in the politics of sovereign nation-states when they don't like what they're doing, and they get to do this because they're born Force-sensitive. And they're totally unlike that other sect of badass Force-sensitive mind-controlling wizards, the Sith, because reasons. One of the Jedi murders all his friends and conquers the entire galaxy because the others won't let him get married. So that's cool. Man, don't even get me started on MCU Iron Man's many blunders and failings. War profiteering, withholding arc reactor technology from the public, arming the US military, which has in-universe shown to be highly susceptible to infiltration by the Nazi organization Hydra, hastily passing the unconstitutional Sokovia Accords, granting him the authority to police private citizens, building Ultron, arming a naive high schooler with a fleet of deadly drones, etc. You could write a thesis paper on why he's a US president's wet dream.
Okay, well, those guys actually are heroes, though, and the people they fight are actually bad.
You know, I'm reminded of this cool quote. It says here in this history book that luckily the good guys won every single time. What are the odds? Winners write the history books after all, guys. In fiction, it's pretty clear who's the good guy and who's the bad guy usually, but that's not always the case in real life. The whole myth of superheroes and action heroes, the fantasy that makes them cool, is what if the most powerful people in the world actually were good guys instead of in real life, where that's not usually the case. Mostly the powerful people are assholes. You ever read a story where the villain kinda makes a certain amount of sense or makes valid points about systemic injustices and the failings of the supposed good guys, but then the heroes win anyways and never really address the concerns brought up by the bad guy? Or hey, remember last episode when I talked about aliens and orcs and goblins and how it's easy to just otherize the bad guys? That way you don't have to grapple with the moral complexity of fighting them. Which leads me to my next point. Another fun potential symptom of all this overexposure to escapist fantasies is the phenomenon of main character syndrome, which incidentally is not a medically recognized condition. It's rather a colloquially coined term for a self-centered perspective, usually featuring delusions of grandeur, victim complex, and a lack of empathy or willingness to understand other people's perspectives. Basically, thinking you're the main character of a story due to thinking of life in terms of Hollywood film, with a beginning, middle, and end, and being unable to recognize yourself as just another person trying to live your life in a sea of people also trying to live their lives. And any difficulty that someone who has MCS might endure in life is merely the plot of the story, a chance for them to level up and get stronger and eventually persevere, and totally not the consequences of bad decisions or the results of someone else having free will that contradicts their own. One of the fun indicators of MCS is unironically referring to people you don't like as sheep, or sheeple, or NPCs, which is a video game term for non-player characters. You know, the other figures in the game who either act as enemies that drop coins and experience points when you jump on their heads, or else they stand at the counter of the item shop and sell you potions. I sincerely wish I was making this shit up, but there are literally brain-poisoned dum-dums out there who think that merely because they don't know someone else well enough to know that they might have thoughts and feelings and dreams and experiences just like them, that they must simply be mindless extras in the fairy tale epic that is their own lives. Gasp in amazement at the legend of Tim, dishwasher at Denny's by day, CrossFit enthusiast, epic level 70 blood elf, and 4chan troll by night. Absolutely nothing like Sadie, the dumb and boring Starbucks barista who serves Tim lattes on his way to work every day. Sadie, who turned Tim down when he asked her out, totally not because she secretly thinks he's weird when she thinks about him at all, and also she already has a boyfriend. No, Sadie's just a libtard NPC with blue hair and no real life who totally isn't just working at Starbucks while trying to finish grad school between shifts so she can be an RN. No, Sadie's just an extra in Tim's epic adventure. And this noble warrior main character mindset is misguided for other reasons. If society's doing its job right, you shouldn't need for every man to be owning a weapon to protect his family and home front from marauding bands of brigands and cutthroats. It's actually preferable for people and communities to have specialized skill sets so some people can grow food, or manufacture goods, or build things, or cook meals, or stitch up clothing, or fix your Wi-Fi, or whatever. Ideally, there should be as few warriors as possible and more doctors, lovers, craftsmen, poets, and teachers. It's not as glorious and exciting as being Geralt of Rivia or Jotaro Kujo, but it does involve a safer, comfier, longer life. And if people are being conscripted by their lords and dukes and barons into going off to fight for God and country, then yeah, actually things have fucked up. I refer again to my Gundam Aerial video where I point out that heroes are indicative of societal failings. I don't subscribe to this idea of the Kali Yuga cycle of strong men creating good times, creating weak men, creating bad times, creating strong men. No, that's some bullshit grandpa philosophy from old men glamorizing bullet wounds and PTSD. And a lot of those strong men don't go on to perpetuate good times. They just take out their baggage on people who don't deserve it. John Rambo in First Blood Part 1 is a strong man, and what does it get him besides paranoia, anger, and pain? Something fear leads to anger, leads to hate, leads to suffering, as Doctor Who from Star Trek once said. That's the true honor of being a soldier, dumb fuck. Fear, anger, hate, and suffering. The most pro-soldier stance you can have, the best advocacy for the well-being of men and women of armed services, is to be anti-war. Hell, that's another thing. Mental and emotional health. You've all heard the dudes would literally rather do X than go to therapy meme, and it's kind of because none of them can imagine Wolverine or Goku or Master Chief or Arnold Schwarzenegger having a panic attack, or crying, or being depressed, or expressing open and intimate platonic affection for someone, or calling a friend up just to talk about a real bad day. Boys don't cry. Boys don't tell their bros that they love them. Boys don't talk about their problems.
Gotta keep those emotions inside. Emotions are for dumb girls who get kidnapped by bad guys. Dudes gotta keep a clear head so they can do important, world-saving shit. Unless you want to get angry. Flying into a rage? Oh no, that's totally acceptable. Being mad just means you hit the bad guys, your problems, even harder. You deal double damage when you hit with the aggro condition. Being angry's good, actually. That's how you Hulk out. That's how you go Super Saiyan. That's how you go beast mode. Being a berserker is actually totally cool and productive because you turn into like a badass rage monster, and whatever is on the receiving end of your little tantrum probably deserves it because they had the fucking gall to cross you not knowing what a big strong man you are. Because you can't just be angry and do something constructive with that anger. Anger means violence. If you're angry, just caveman club that shit. And that guarded, hostile, isolationist emotional state? Just another factor added to the pile of things weighing upon the psyches of young men. All these tales of high adventure and great battles and fathers and grandfathers and brothers going off to, quote, defend our rights, have a lot of young men in contemporary society feeling adrift, feeling like they're empty and hollow and worthless. All these figures built up in their minds as idols, as invincible heroes, they all play on the insecurities of your average dude. After all, they've never done anything great like their fathers who went to war. They've never gone on an epic quest to save all of Hyrule. All they have to show for their life is a lot of time spent on video games and shitposting memes. A semi-comfortable life where no one's shooting at you and you can masturbate to Overwatch hentai whenever you want. And you're upset and miserable? Bullshit! Your great-granddaddy didn't have time to feel sad in WW2. That would have gotten in the way of his killing 50 men. Straighten up and stop bellyaching, soldier. Better for you to die in some senseless war than for you to be alive and comfortable. And it'd be different maybe if they were seeing financial success for all the hard work they do at their jobs. If maybe they could benefit from post-war economic stimulus plans like FDR's New Deal. If they could feel some sense of independence and control over their lives, fulfill the conventionally masculine role of a provider. But the tightening grip of late-stage capitalism around everybody's necks prevents that. With stagnating wages and collapsing housing markets and the ever-decreasing ability to break free of the financial support of your parents, is it any wonder that young men are feeling emasculated? Is it any wonder that they're diving more and more into escapism and fantasy? Is it any wonder that predatory supposed men's rights activists are appealing to them with their talk of being an alpha male and offering dipshit solutions like working out, hustling more at your job, and rejecting things that bring you comfort? These creeps are always trying to sell you on a Conan the Barbarian mindset, and because young men have been brought up on these stories of noble warriors and valorous heroes, it's an easy sell. For example, Jordan Peterson even has the gall to say shit like, if you're not a formidable force, there's no morality in your self-control. If you're incapable of violence, not being violent isn't a virtue. People who teach martial arts know this full well. If you learn martial arts, you learn to be dangerous, but simultaneously, you learn to control it. Life is a very difficult process and you're not prepared for it unless you have the capacity to be dangerous. You should be capable of it, but that doesn't mean you should ever use it. Yeah, sure, learning to be violent, having the capacity to harm others, has never resulted in great harm being done. Maybe learn the self-control first in non-violent contexts, and then maybe take some self-defense classes. But teaching dumbfuck kids who watch too much Ninja Turtles how to be violent first so they can then learn self-control? Yeah, I can't imagine that going poorly somehow. Incidentally, do you actually think those male influencers are abiding by the principles that they tell you to live by? Does Jordan fucking Peterson really seem like a dangerous man's man who could fight in a war? Or is he just a skinny fucking nerd with zero scruples and the benefit of coming from and landing in a decent amount of money? Who cries way too much on camera because women are being so mean to dudes because they don't want to sleep with them? Who fires off 30 rage tweets an hour and is probably back to battling substance abuse again? Sounds pretty effeminate, actually. Do you really think the likes of Matt Walsh or Steven Crowder or Charlie Kirk or Sneeko or Aiden Ross or any other brave defender of traditional masculinity are actually good at anything? Or are they just privileged dudes, born to a decent amount of wealth, willing to sell their souls to sell you the snake oil of patriarchy, because they know it'll never actually solve any of your problems, but that you'll keep coming back to buy their bullshit? And the few who actually are somewhat physically strong, the Andrew Tates, well, they're just violent, entitled psychopaths who have the ability to be dangerous and never bothered to learn control because they didn't need to. They learned to be dangerous, and then they learned to be bullies because they didn't need to learn control to get what they wanted, Dr. Peterson. So with all this conditioning that tells these young men to be warriors and to fight for what they believe in, what do you suppose is the end result? Well, I could hit you with some uncomfortable statistics if you like. Findings from 2019 show that despite men making up 49% of the population, men account for 84% of all violent crimes, 98% of all sexual offenses, 93% of all weapon possession, 92% of all robberies, and 86% of all criminal damage and arson. 85% of victims of domestic violence are women, and 25 to 40% of families of police officers are subject to domestic abuse, and roughly 1/3 of all active service members or combat veterans with PTSD are reported to have been physically aggressive with their female partners. Oh, and you know all those public shootings that occur basically daily now? 98% cis men. But we're in luck. We recently had a rare instance of an AFAB trans dude committing a shooting. Hooray! Progress! Or else, how many dudes are signing up to join the police or military, thinking that they can put that warrior mindset into real-world proxy and bludgeon the world into order whenever bad guys try to ruin it? Yeah, again, how many bad guys do you think there actually are? How many Skeletors or Orochimarus or Ted Bundys versus how many people who are like shoplifting video games from Walmart or are addicted to drugs or just have the poor judgment to be born with brown skin in some country that has some resource that the US wants to take? There's a whole industry that's popped up in the last century that revolves entirely around mythologizing and fictionalizing the role of police in society as brave defenders of freedom, rather than just reactive agents of capital who don't serve and protect so much as surveil and punish. We talked about those statistics of dudes committing violent crimes. How many of them have just grown up exposed to all the same shit as you, and have had a rough time of it for so long that lashing out is something they've been conditioned into and driven to by desperation? We always talk about mental health after a shooting, but then just sit on our hands and capable of figuring out some kind of nationalized mental health service or actual rehabilitative programs. Nope, just shoot them. Just line them up and shoot them, or else throw them away in prison forever. How convenient. The problem and the solution is violence. Why yes, I do have some pat labor models I plan to put together at some point. Why do you ask? And don't go telling me, oh well it's natural for men to be aggressive, what with genetics and testosterone and all that. No, shut the fuck up. You don't get to use genetics as an excuse for bad behavior, dumb fucks. You're not fucking sharks driven into a feeding frenzy by the smell of blood. You have a brain and free will and the capacity for reason and all of that. I thought Dr. Peterson said you had to learn to be dangerous. If anything, that makes my point for me. If you are genetically predisposed to violent action, then maybe we should be doing everything we can to discourage violence and antisocial behavior with our media, rather than hyping you up with it. People bashing each other over the head with rocks is actually pretty counterproductive for a healthy society. You'd only ever need to hit someone over the head with a rock when there's someone else going around hitting people with rocks. And that's only after you've exhausted every other option for convincing them not to bash people. So let's just avoid the whole rock thing by educating everyone on why using them as bludgeons is a bad idea. You want to bring what's natural into this argument? Okay, bitch. Then what are you doing with a smartphone in your hand? What are you doing driving to work instead of foraging for food? What are you doing taking Tylenol when you have a headache? What are you doing taking shits in places with doors on them? None of that shit's natural. Fucking grow up. The whole point of civilization should be finding ways to make things more pleasant and fulfilling for people, rather than settling for whatever's most natural, if what's natural isn't conducive to the goal of making people happier.
So, DBiddles, are you saying that we should be taking the violence out of media? Are you saying that it actually is responsible for Columbine shooters?
No, stupid. My favorite superhero is Batman, and my runners-up in no particular order are Captain America, Daredevil, Green Lantern, and the Spectre. I'm in no position to start policing potentially problematic media. I've been all about Chainsaw Man and Fist of the North Star lately, and in the case of the latter, it's not because I find the plot or characters particularly thought-provoking. This is a topic for another video, but I think it's okay for people to enjoy media and stories where not everything is perfectly progressive or enlightened. People have been violent long before anime, video games, and movies. It's just instead of Stallone, we had Beowulf or Samson. I don't believe in the suppression of creativity. This should not be taken as advocacy for pacifism. Unfortunately, there are times when diplomacy and goodwill are not sufficient. Sometimes, frankly, a Nazi is getting off easy if all he gets is a swift kick to the testicles instead of a cap to the back of the head. Reasonable, proportionate self-defense should be unambiguously defended. Just note the words reasonable and proportionate at the start of that.
So what are you suggesting?
Well, unfortunately, my precious viewer, whom I'm sorry for calling stupid a second ago, that's not a simple answer. Patriarchy and the reinforcement of such is, like a lot of things I complain about, a multifaceted problem which will need a variety of tactics to address. Though just because that's the case, that doesn't mean we shouldn't attempt to address them. I think one of the most important steps we need to take in addressing such is being more mindful of the sorts of things that reinforce such aggressive perspectives. As I said last episode, it's important to mature in our understanding of the media we consume, especially if you're going to insist on fixating on stuff beyond childhood. Seeking to emulate the positive qualities of your heroes is all well and good, but recognizing the very real, substantial differences in their stories and your own means also recognizing that you'll probably often need to address your own real-world struggles in less combative, less aggressive fashions. I know that sounds like some no-shit Sherlock advice, but really, how often are we taking all that into account if so many young men seek to emulate that violence? If guys keep daydreaming about killing zombies because it seems like such a fun thing to do in real life? One of the concrete ways that this can be done, rather than blithering out some high-minded idealism about cartoons on the internet, would be in funding schools and community outreach programs where young people who might otherwise lack opportunity or social lives can get a chance to interact with actual human beings to offset all those pedestrians they gleefully run over in GTA. I know, that means higher taxes. But if it goes towards a better world, think of it as investing in your future. So long as we live in a world where people need to pay money to get things, taxes are a necessity for creating and maintaining public services and infrastructure that we all use. Think of it as everyone chipping in for pizza at a party. And if you're really galled by that, I don't know, maybe we could tax the ultra-wealthy even more? If you take $50 from someone who only has $1,000, and you take $600,000 from someone with $1 million, even though it's a higher percentage of their money, I still don't feel all that bad about charging the rich person more, because they still have way more money on the other end of that exchange than the first person. And if that $600,000 helps to fund libraries, or public soccer leagues, or rec centers, or after-school programs, or affordable housing, or government-sponsored rehab facilities, or mental health programs, or whatever, to help angry, disillusioned dudes not turn to violent outbursts, then, that's kind of what a government is supposed to be doing. That's the whole reason we're electing these people, not so they can help oil barons get away with polluting the environment. I'm again not saying that violent video games are the problem, but meeting new people and having positive real-world experiences might help impressionable youth differentiate between video game NPCs and all the fun juvenile virtual violence you can do to them, and real-world flesh and blood people who have different thoughts and experiences from your own. The whole "it takes a village" saying doesn't just apply to children. Adults too benefit from community interaction and public services. If we're all better socialized rather than living alone and locking ourselves away to spend every non-work hour playing countless hours of Call of Duty and watching 300 on repeat, that's no good for us. That's a pressure cooker for young men to be turned into misanthropic time bombs who only need someone like Tucker Carlson or Alex Jones to then come along and light the fuse. A lot of these dudes can be easily redirected away from that rage if they have some friends or activities that get their minds off of paranoia and onto constructive things. Or alternatively, instead of raising taxes, maybe some of the vast sums of money that go towards police and military spending could instead go to the aforementioned schools and community. Maybe if more people grow up happy and educated, there'd be less need for zentradi, police and soldiers. But if I'm sticking purely to the realm of fiction and media instead of trying to advocate for my boring leftist policy suggestions, I might also suggest portraying violence in a more thoughtful fashion in fiction. For example, if superheroes are so hyper-competent, how much force do they need to use in fighting crime? If they're all so insanely powerful, at what point does their crime fighting turn from protecting the innocent into bullying disenfranchised mentally ill victims of an uncaring society? Surely a common street crook can be better subdued via a blast of spiderwebbing or a bat grapple rather than a knuckle sandwich. Surely a lot more than a few supervillains can be reasoned with, and they're not all just, the Joker who gets hard at the thought of murdering people. A really neat comic from a couple years back was Marvel's Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. The title character started in 1991 as a joke character, where the joke is, despite being a teenage girl with silly-sounding powers, she's actually very capable and intelligent, and has used those skills to handily thwart big-time villains like Dr. Doom, Ultron, and Thanos. But in her 2015 comic, while she's perfectly skilled at eating nuts and kicking butts, as she so often says, she also frequently employs conversation and mediation tactics to pacify or redirect villains like Kraven or Galactus. A little of the old talk no jutsu can go a long way to not only avoiding confrontation, but also turn would-be enemies into allies. Most people, if you kick their ass, are not going to come back later as your friendly nemesis sparring partner like Vegeta. No, they're going to shake their fists and swear vengeance. Maybe you can reduce the recidivism rate if you talk with Captain Cold, and help him find a way to put his skills towards alleviating his economic pressures rather than just taking him back to prison. To quote Wonder Woman, "Don't kill if you can wound. Don't wound if you can subdue. Don't subdue if you can pacify. And don't raise your hand at all until you first extended it." Or else, works of fiction showing a reluctance towards violence, or maybe reasons why violence is a suboptimal solution, might be more ideal. We all remember how Aang struggled very hard to come to terms with having to do battle with the Fire Lord and possibly having to kill him, and his unwillingness to grievously harm even the most detestable of foes until it was absolutely necessary makes him a strikingly unique and admirable protagonist. Or hey, one of the standout features of Demon Slayer, for example, is in recognizing the humanity of the various enemies whom Tanjiro faces. And while their tragedy doesn't absolve their wrongdoing, it does put it into perspective, and helps you to understand that these so-called monsters are traumatized, embittered people whose fates could have been avoided with aid and understanding. And one of the things that really drew me to Mecha, or at least the ones I watched when I first got into it, was in its stark portrayal of the horrors faced by the characters. Amuro and Hikaru learned pretty early on how distasteful it is having to do battle with enemy soldiers, especially after some of them were nice to you and bought you lunch just because they recognized your inherent humanity. Whew, I could go on, but we're wrapping up here on the Valkyrie. Let me tell you, this was a doozy of a build. Had to do a lot of work off camera just to get it looking this good. It's still pretty shabby, I'm gonna admit. I do want to come back to the topic of dudes and reassessing the roles that society expects of dudes at some point, though. I think that while there are a lot of privileges that dudes enjoy, and we should acknowledge and address that, I think it's important for us to also seek to help educate and empathize with how patriarchy can also oppress dudes as well. And maybe a lot more dudes would be more open to addressing the problems facing others if they more readily understood that there are healthier and more fulfilling ways of being dudes that will improve not only their own lives, but the lives of those around them. There's nothing wrong with being a dude, after all, so long as you're striving to be a good dude. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe and share the video with others who might get something out of it. Maybe you can tell me down below some other creative ways conflict and combat have been portrayed in a healthier fashion in media. Boy, these last couple episodes have been a little intense. Maybe tune in for the next episode of ChatBots, where we'll take a little break from being so serious and maybe try doing something a little different. Sayonara, bye-bye.